Randy K here. We all go through struggles at times, and I want to share with you through stories and insights and interviews with others how much God loves you. He loves you immensely, and that's what I hope you will hear through our interviews and what we have to share with you. Thanks for staying tuned. Here we go. Hi, my guest today is Khalil. He experienced a drug overdose. His heart likely stopped and he experienced hell. I've got to share with you before we go to Khalil that on very few occasions will I come across somebody who shares their story, and I feel that this is something that people desperately need to hear. You are going to want to listen to this because I was on the floor when I was listening and to Khalil's story. It just got me to the heart, and it's going to be difficult. I know that Khalil, I'll go to you and welcome to our show. It's
Hey,
great to have you. And I know you suffered, even Khalil, some degree of what we would probably term PTSD from your experience. That is, you're in hell.
yes.
And, people don't often, Khalil, understand, as we've come to learn, that those who go through a hell experience, that it is as difficult as being in battle in a war zone, if not
Mhm.
more, because hell is is hell. There's nothing worse that you can go through than a true experience in hell. So, Khalil, again, great to have you with us. Let's get into the story
Yes, sir.
because I'll let you start where you would like to, Khalil. But tell us about what happened leading up to the event, and then we'll get into, oh my goodness, what it's like to be in hell.
Okay. So I guess to start off, to give some, background of the type of person that I was at the time, I, during that time of my life, I was 18, 19 years old. The event happened when I was 19, but I had struggled with depression from family issues, just from lack of self confidence. So I would do a lot of things that I thought would make me feel better when in reality they were just hurting me worse. Like I was hanging around people to seem cool. I was doing drugs. I was just living a worldly lifestyle, trying to fit in where I really didn't belong. So that call, I'm not saying that caused me because we all make our own choices, but a lot of factors enforced me to do certain behaviors that just aren't right. So that being said, the night of the event, I was already doing drugs consistently. I was smoking all the time. I was experimenting with other things that I shouldn't have been doing. Like I was doing Molly, I was taking LSD. I was even experimenting with other stuff, but I would rather not say because that's embarrassing. But I was doing a lot of drugs. And the people who I was hanging around with, they only cared about doing said drugs. I wasn't around a good system. Now my family, they didn't want me to do that stuff. They told me that what I was doing was bad. I'm not saying anything wrong with my family. They actually were encouraging me to stop doing that. But the way I felt about myself and just my mentality, the strongholds that I had within me, I just didn't listen. So that night, I remember just being, it was just me and one person. And I had done drugs with this person before, and it was, a regular thing. Like we would hang out, we would smoke, but it would never be a regular hangout thing. We would always have to do something, which hindsight, I'm like, okay, obviously that should have been a red flag automatically, but I wasn't thinking like that. So I remember it actually started early that day. Me and him were communicating. We were talking about, hanging out and smoking and doing all that stuff. And at first, that's all we talked about was just smoking. And I was fine with it because that's what I had done before at that time. And then fast forward, I eventually pick him up. We're going to go get stuff. And he suggests that we get LSD from his dealer, a dealer that I had never purchased from or even knew. I didn't know anything about this person, but me just not caring and me having that type of mind state, I was like, whatever. Like, I didn't like myself. I didn't want to feel like myself. So I went ahead and bought it anyway. So I had bought, I guess, two hits for me. He had taken three. And before we even gotten back to his place, which was where we were going, I had took mine and he had took his, and then we got to his place and we're smoking. And I beforehand I did feel strange, like okay, something just didn't feel right that night. But I ignored it as okay, well, I mean, this always happens. I always feel uncomfortable, or it didn't matter. I just wanted to just not be myself, essentially. So it just didn't matter what would have happened. But that was obviously the biggest mistake. So we got to his place and we ended up, like, we had already taken it before we got there. We ended up smoking and all that other stuff. And at first, everything had seemed normal because when you take a drug like that, it takes a while for it to actually kick in. So everything seemed relatively normal at first, like, routine. And then over time, I just started to feel it wasn't how it normally felt, because I normally felt like, that drug kind of makes you like paranoid and anxious at first, but then you kind of get giddy. You're kind of like, you're not thinking, you're not really in a normal headspace. You're kind of just everywhere. But that time I felt extreme anxiety, but like it wasn't to the point where I couldn't control it initially, but over time it got worse because something felt wrong with me inside. So that was after, like, I believe an hour when I start to feel like that, because it takes about that amount of time to kick in. So, I started asking him, like, about his plug or his deal or whatever. He said it was fine. He was trying to reassure me and all that, but something just still didn't feel right. So I tried to distract myself by listening to music and, just going out to the balcony and being outside. Nothing was really helping. I just progressively felt worse and worse, and then I was starting to get more and more anxious. So, this guy, he's, you know, I'm not going to talk negatively about him, because at the end of the day, it was my decision to do that with him. That was all my fault. But he was trying to calm me down. He was trying to say this and that, but something just didn't feel right about this person. Like, even though I had hung around him previously, it was almost as if I felt like evil from him. Like I couldn't trust him. Something just felt wrong. So, but I tried to ignore it once again. I don't know why. At no point did I listen to any goodness in my heart. At no point did I really try to like put two and two together. I just kept blowing everything off that was coming to me. Like, no, like this is wrong. You need to get out of here. I just kept blowing it off. So, and after that hour, it was about probably 12 or 1 o'clock, something around that time. As the night progressed, it just got worse and worse and worse. And then I remember there was a point where I kind of wanted to go home, but I wanted to also be somewhere comfortable. So I tried to go to my car because that was the one place of familiarity that I had. I'm like, okay, I've been in my car a bunch of times. Everywhere just around his house, around his area, just felt really dark. And it felt like darkness was slowly easing its way in. And it just, I, I couldn't deal with that. So when I went to my car, I remember asking him like, "Hey, can we go outside to like my car, like not to the balcony, to like to my car?" And he said, "Okay." And then that was when I first started to really like have almost an anxiety attack, because I didn't remember walking outside, opening his front door, or walking downstairs. I just remember being in his house, and I blinked and I opened my eyes and I was in my car, and I was like, "That's not normal," because that's never happened before. So I'm like, okay, I started to freak out because I'm like, what is happening? I'm trying to collect myself and put myself together. My heart is pounding so hard at this point because it was unnatural. And then he's trying to calm me down, but his face started to look demonic. He started to look like a demon in my vehicle. So I'm freaking out because when I started seeing his face look like that, I hop out of my car and then I try to like get away from him, and he hops out of my car and chases me. In hindsight, he was probably trying to calm me down, but it just didn't feel like that. It felt like he was trying to keep me there, like he was trying to keep me where he was at, and I didn't want to be there anymore. Like I really wanted to go home at that point. And when he got out of the car and chased me, it felt like I was being chased by a demon. So at that point, I'm freaking out. I'm scared. My heart's pounding harder, harder, harder. I am starting to lose it at that point. I remember he puts his hand on my shoulder. He was like, and then he said, "Oh, dude, it's fine. Just stay here. It's fine. It's cool." and I bolted. Like I ran away as fast as I could because at that point I'm like, no, like it's not fine here. Like I felt as if I was dying because my heart was pounding so hard, it was starting to feel like my body was like vibrating almost. So I couldn't do that. So I ran away. And this at this point, it was like 1:45, it had to be 2 a.m. or something like that. But I had ran around his house, or not his house, his apartment complex. I'm sorry, his apartment complex. And the side of the building, it didn't have any light. And I remember the moment I ran around and ran into the darkness on the side of his building, that's when everything just like I completely was out of it. Like I couldn't feel anything anymore. Like I couldn't feel myself breathe. I couldn't feel my heart beating. I couldn't feel anything. It felt as if the moment I ran around that corner into the dark, like a leg, or not a leg, an arm had reached up and grabbed me and pulled me on the ground. That's what it felt like happened. And at this point, I started screaming because it was insanity. It felt like at that point, I'm like, no, like this is absolutely ridiculous. Like him looking like a demon, for me feeling like I'm dying, and then me feeling like I'm being pulled on the ground. I'm like, oh gosh, like I made a mistake. Like that's the first thing I started playing in my head. I've made a mistake. Like this was not right. And I started to immediately regret even taking the drugs, even being in that situation, even being around him doing that, because I felt like I was just pulled underground. So I'm like, okay, I just died. So at that point, when I felt like that, is when I started to just scream. I was screaming, screaming, screaming. Like I felt like I was trying to crawl out. And then next thing I know, as I'm trying to escape from this situation, if I realized I was powerless, but then it feels like a hand had came from up here and went like this. And when that happened, I was completely blown away by that because it was like I was on Earth, but then I immediately, like, it was no time elapsed. It was like boom, boom, like it almost instant. I was here. And then when I looked up, it was the brightest light I had ever seen. It was the most extreme, like it wasn't even a light that was painful to look at, but I couldn't look at it because it was just so bright, like brighter than staring into the sun. And it hit me like, okay, this is God. So I'm confused because I didn't want to believe what was happening was happening. Like it just, I didn't want to believe that. Like, because who wants to believe they died? But I remember, I really don't like this part because it always feels so disappointing to just think about when when he was holding me in his hand like this, like, and I was just facing him. For one, it was oddly peaceful despite the circumstances of what was going on, but it was at the same time it was extremely horrifying because I mean, it seemed to be God. So when you're face to face with the creator of all creation, you it is a very difficult to comprehend situation almost, especially when it's in those type of circumstances. It's like, what just happened? So I'm asking him what's going on, what happened, like what is this? And I remember him holding me. He was like, I'm sorry to say, my son, you've committed, a terrible that. It was like I kept thinking like, okay, how am I in the situation? And I remember just thinking about all the things I had done up until that point. But then all those things I was thinking about, I started to realize were sinful. So I remember just thinking, oh, well, who am I? Like, what am I? Like, what's going on? And then next thing I know, my name, I am Khalil Darius Manning, and I am a sinner. I'm Khalil Darius Manning, and I'm a fornicator, a adulterer, a idolater, like just a whole bunch of list of things stacking up on top of each other over and over and over and over on top of my head, as if like everything that I had done was being like tallied. But it wasn't even like small things. It was like serious things that I didn't realize that I had done that were so serious. So it felt like the sins that I had committed up until that point were all being placed upon my head. Like I had to carry that. Like, okay. And at that, during that point, I knew God was real. At that point, I knew that there was a God, but I didn't, at that point in my life, I had not given my life over to Jesus. So there wasn't anybody to save me. I wasn't forgiven for anything because I hadn't turned to him. I had, like I said, I believed in God, but I wasn't too open with that idea because I had believed so many lies. Like people were trying to say that the Bible was completely man-made, that it's a religion and all this and that. And a lot of that stuff can muddy up your mind because when you actually read the word, you realize it's not like that. Like it's completely different than what people nowadays are trying to say about it. But during that time when that was going on, I didn't have that knowledge. So
Khalil, you didn't have that knowledge that you didn't have that, that there's a separation, I guess, between knowledge and actually what we know as salvation. That is when Jesus
mhm,
becomes our Lord, which is a spiritual experience versus a head knowledge, right? And
yes,
so you were before God at this point. You knew it was God. You had this
yeah,
implicit understanding that this is God, and you understood that, but you also had this conviction coming across that you had sinned in this way, in this way, in this way, in this way.
mhm,
And it sounds like, there was just this despair, hopelessness that there's nothing you can do at that point because
absolutely.
you don't know
Like
where to go. And,
I,
and
it's a feeling of just being completely at the mercy of something else. Like I didn't have the strength to do anything, but to observe pretty much. Like I didn't have power to really move. I didn't really have power to really breathe. Everything was in his hands, and that is horrifying because when we're here, we can walk around, we can look around and breathe and all that, but when you're in that position, you don't do that. He controlled all of that. So it was a complete feeling of hopelessness. Yet, since I was in the presence of God, it was still a feeling of peace because it's God. Like, and it was like I instinctually knew exactly what was happening, although I had never been in a situation like that ever. And that's the part that just blew my mind because I'm just like, I don't know. It was like the words came in my mind. I'm like, okay, I've sinned. I never previously thought of my previous actions as being sin. I knew that this light was God, yet I've never seen God here. Like he's everywhere around us, but you don't see him. And that's the thing. So it's like I just already knew what it was. But him telling me, him holding me like this, and him telling me that, all these sins being tallied up, and then not to mention I had committed suicide, I immediately was like, how did I kill myself? Like, that's impossible. I was scared out of my mind, freaking out, like, no, like, how did I kill myself? And then I hear a whole bunch of voices below, and they say acid. So I'm just like that's impossible because from my understanding, you couldn't overdose from that. None of that stuff was ever possible. But that's why I don't think it had to be laced with something else. That's because I had never bought from this person. I never been around this person. I didn't know this person. I was just around my friend at the time who knew of this person. So immediately my brain started to try to rationalize like how did I got to this? But it didn't matter because the moment I heard those voices down there, like it just hit me like this. I'm not about to stay with God. Like I'm not about to be in heaven. And then he he said, I'm sorry, my son to me. And then I started screaming, like I'm crying, I'm like, wait, no, no, like no. And he goes like this, and I'm falling. And then it's crazy because when he picked me up and went like this, it felt instant. But when I started falling, that's when it felt like a large time. Like it felt like the longest amount of time I can't even fathom. Like you fall, you fall, you fall. It felt like I was falling for years almost. But those years also felt like seconds. I don't think that when you die, time really has any meaning. It just doesn't. You just kind of exist, if that makes any sense. So I was falling, and it felt like I was falling for years. And at first, it was like I tried so hard to like not believe what was happening. Like, no, like this is, I'm trying to lean on my own understanding. Like, no, this is drugs, this is this and that. But then it's like it felt too real. I'm like, it felt realer than being here right now. So I'm like, oh, this is like no. But then as I kept falling, it started to hit me like, oh no, I messed up. Like, this isn't a joke. Like you you don't you it I can't even, there's no putting words on that feeling when you truly realize that you have messed up. It isn't like you missing in the game winning three in basketball and you messed up. Like, no, like you messed up and you can't fix this. There is no fixing this. There is no getting better after this. This is it. And that's the part that broke me in my spirit as I'm falling, because I'm like I pleaded. I was screaming to God as I'm falling down, like, please wait, please, like, give me another chance. And he was not listening. He wasn't. And at that, in the moment, I thought that God had abandoned me. But in hindsight, him saying, I'm sorry, son, and me looking back on that event, I realized I abandoned him. And he was disappointed that I didn't choose him. And it didn't hit me until I started to really like sit down and think about it, because that had been on my mind for the longest. Like, why did he say that to me? Why was he disappointed? But then it wasn't that he failed me. He didn't fail me at all. I failed him. And he just wanted what was best for me.
It's almost like he regretted or was mournful or sorrowful that he had to let you go. Was
That's
that the
exactly,
impression?
that's what it felt like. It felt as if he didn't want to, but when I recently read in the Bible, he is a holy God and he's a God of his word. So it doesn't matter how he may feel. It doesn't matter anything. He's going to do exactly what he said he was going to do every single time. So it didn't matter. So he just let me go, because that's him. And also looking back on it, I remember, I'll get to that part later in the story because it's kind of essential. But I'm falling, I'm screaming. And at some point, I started to realize it was futile. And then I hit Earth. And then the moment I hit Earth, it felt like everything in me just kind of broke. Like everything in me is kind of like my bones, my hands and everything. And then I started to see myself in third person. It was weird. It wasn't like I was looking at my hands or whatever like this, and I was in my body. It was like I was watching my soul. And the moment I hit the ground, it hurt so bad I couldn't believe it. Like I couldn't even really scream the moment I hit the ground, because it felt so like, it's, you can't fathom that. If we had fell from a height like that, we would die. So when I had fell from such a height and crashed and hit Earth again, and I didn't die, I couldn't process that. It was like, what just happened? And the next thing I know, once again, I feel something grab my body and I'm getting pulled now. At the moment I start getting pulled again, it feels like I'm falling again. But it's so strange, because I might have been getting pulled so fast that it felt like I was falling, but it felt like I was falling again, but this time into the earth. So this time I'm screaming, like I'm screaming, because I'm like, oh no, like what is happening now? Like it was at this point, I kind of just knew, like I'm not going up, I'm going down. So where else am I going at this point? So I'm falling into the ground further and further and further. I can't breathe at all. Like I feel like I'm bumping into stuff, like whatever is pulling me on the way down. It's all hitting me. And then this also feels like years of me falling again. The distance between heaven and earth, and the distance between earth and hell, like heaven, and then the distance between heaven and hell, like it is the farthest, like it is so uncomprehensibly far away from each other. Because the one thing that bothered my mind so much after the experience was time. Time just didn't feel real to me, because I had felt like I had been doing, like falling for thousands of years, and it felt like I was in hell for eons and millennia. So as I'm falling down, it eventually starts getting hotter, and it starts getting hotter, and it starts getting hotter and hotter, like as if I'm being thrown into an oven that's being thrown into a furnace. And then it just gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and I'm starting to scream louder and louder, and then I'm starting to hit more stuff. And then the moment I feel like I breached, it was like I was still seeing in third person, and then I start seeing a whole bunch of bodies. Like it was a bunch of people falling with me. It was people falling all around me, all screaming. But their screams weren't, it was like my scream was the loudest scream. Like, I don't know. I can't even explain that. It's like I could hear them, but I mainly heard myself. And I I start falling more and more, and I'm starting to hit people, and I'm starting to like I'm just running into stuff as I'm falling down, pretty much. And I see a whole bunch of like it's just people. They look all terrified. There were so many people in there, it didn't even make sense to me. It was like I described it as like everybody drives on a highway at some point. Everybody's in public at some point. You see a whole bunch of random faces that you've never seen before. Some of those people you will probably never see again, but you see all those people there. It's almost as if anybody that you ever encountered just randomly at any point in your life is there. Most people were there. Like it seemed as if everybody, not everybody, but most people that has ever been on this planet were there. And I couldn't
What
even
you
like,
said, Khalil, it seemed to you like most people that had lived on the planet were in that place that you were in hell?
yes, like it wasn't like, oh, it was a couple people. Like, no, it seemed as if there were so many people there. It would be more than the people who are on the earth right now. It was that many people, but I see them all as I'm falling. I'm flooding in with all these people. And eventually, it's like I hit a floor or something, and the floor is like it's hot, and I didn't have like at that point, like I said, I'm still seeing in third person. I didn't have like flesh or something. Like I could feel everything, but it didn't feel like me because it felt like my legs were broken and twisted. Like every time I tried to walk, I couldn't take a proper step. Like I couldn't, it was like I was mangled, but I was alive. And the worst part about the whole deal is, yeah, you fall in with all these people, but that's it. After that, it's almost like you're completely alone. And you can see people off in the distance, but you can never reach these people. So it's like, you know, you're not alone in there, but you can never see another person in there. I don't know how to even describe that. You see these people, but you don't, there's no connection. Like being or just to communicate with somebody, just to talk to someone, just to, you know, even be around another human being in itself is a blessing because the loneliness that you feel in there is the most deepest. I, I don't even know a word for it,
Total
but it's
separation. I mean, you had no
no
relationship
nothing,
whatsoever, and no one had any
nothing.
relationship with each other.
No one had a relationship with each other, and you definitely don't have a relationship with God because it doesn't matter. Like I heard praying, I heard screaming, I heard all types of just yelling. There was no, it was barely any coherentness in there. But I even myself started to try to pray, and then he wasn't listening because at that point it was too late for me. Like that was my final destination. So then at that point I start seeing like these disgusting looking creatures, and then I remember I seen like it was like it's like this creature that had the body of a gorilla with other and like with the head of a bull, and it had like other parts to it. It was it was disgusting. Like I didn't. It was like it was not. I can't even think of God making something like that. But whatever abomination of disgusting creatures, they were just in there. And then those things, I'm assuming they were demons. They had to have been demons because I don't know what else that could be. But they were tormenting people. Like I remember the moment I hit the ground, they surrounded me and started hurting and tormenting me. Like they could just do whatever they want down there. And there's nothing that you could do to stop them from doing it. So it's it's they I'm sorry. Um
Oh. This is so hard. I know, Cleo, and we have to applaud you for your courage in sharing this because I know it kind of brings back a memory of something that you may want to forget. It's so horrendous, and
mhm.
you're in this space now with these demons who look otherworldly and disgusting, uh, and you are feeling isolated except for the fact that it sounds like they're seeking to devour you, seeking to do something to you. How did you feel at that point? I mean, were you feeling like they wanted to do something to you?
They just want to hurt. They don't they hate us. They hated me because everybody else in there was screaming. I'm assuming they're attacking everybody, and there's a ridiculous amount of number. Like they're not everywhere like how we were, because just being there in general is terrible. So some people probably on the upper level or whatever he probably wasn't even getting attacked. I can't even imagine what, just the fact that you exist in that place is terrible. So I don't know, but I don't think everybody there was being tormented by those things. But just the fact that you are there in itself, knowing that you can't get out, knowing that there's nothing that you could do, knowing that you will never see your family again, knowing that you'll never have a moment of happiness again, knowing the fact that every moment, and there isn't a sleep, you don't sleep. It's every waking moment. So forever, permanently, you're just you just can't do anything. Like there isn't anything that you could possibly do at all. Nothing at all. Like you're done. Like I cannot emphasize that at all. You can't do anything. You're just there, and that's it. And the more you think about that, the worse that reality becomes, because you can't escape. You cannot run. You can run, but you won't go anywhere. You can't climb up the side of the wall and get out. You can't call to Jesus, because he will not come and get you. You can't call to God, because he will not come and get you. There is nothing that can save you. There is nothing that cares about you. There's nothing that loves you. Everything hates you there. Everything wants to hurt you. You can't. You can't. So at that point, you're dead. That's the only thing I could think of. At that point, you're dead. Like you're actually dead. Like yeah, your flesh dies on earth, but you're really dead at that point. And it's terrible. Like it.
You actually experienced levels in this place, in this hell, didn't you?
Yes,
Didn't you?
yes.